Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. I want to start this video from explaining you why Russia is unable to win in this war. Sometimes I read comments from the Russian side saying that they are victorious, they are taking the ground and little by little they are winning. They even started this new Kharkiv operation which completely failed for them with their losses ratio and inability to send more of their resources, but we're gonna speak about it later on in this video. Well, the main factor for Russia in this war was the inability to control their forces, providing enough communication and supplies. And also one more thing, their command is quite incompetent. That is why they were unable to hold all of those territories under control and finally gave up all of that to Ukraine. On the paper, they had enough forces to occupy all of the Ukraine, but at first they decided to use just the part of it, the tiny little part, less than 200,000 troops back in 2022. Yes, for now they increased their group by more than 2 times, but they're still capable to control this territory, which is much less compared to what it was from the very beginning. And if you check out probably the most effective Russian advancement, for example, Avdiivka, let's measure what it was back in 2022 and what it is today, 26.82 kilometers, so 27 kilometers. Roughly 17 miles from the previous border of the unrecognized Donetsk People's Republic. 2 years. Yes, we understand that Russia got those huge areas under control, but it was the mistake of Ukraine. There was almost no resistance. In all of the southern part, just Mariupol was well defended by the Azov regiment, but Azov had much less resources compared to the Russian army. That's why in a while Russia was able to occupy the city. Russians simply encircled the settlement and cut all of the supplies. Every army would surrender in that case. So I must state 100% that Ukraine wasn't really prepared for the Russian offensive from the very beginning, but Russia also wasn't prepared for Ukrainian resistance. And the area where Ukrainian resistance was prepared, for example, eastern part, Russia advanced not that much. Also, the most crazy losses they had for Bakhmut as well as for Avdiivka. In Bakhmut they lost around 20, that's what they say, some experts say 25,000 soldiers. In Avdiivka it's around 17,000, but the settlement of Avdiivka is smaller compared to Bakhmut. And Bakhmut is not that big city, Ukraine has dozens of them. The biggest city Russia was able to occupy is the Kherson city, but only because there was no resistance against the Russian advancement. They went here occupying all of this region, and just in Mykolaiv they had some of the resistance and were forced to retreat after all. Their positions were limited to this area at first, but after Ukraine started its counteroffensive, Russians decided to withdraw their forces. A goodwill gesture. Russia performs all of those goodwill gestures just because they're unable to control their army in Ukraine in multiple directions. Just see what happened to the Kharkiv assault. It completely failed without reaching its goal, so for sure Ukraine will push Russians out from the Kharkiv region. Russia will send the remaining of the Kharkiv group to the other directions. I expect it to be like that at least. So back to the east, the strategic Russian goal, as Putin announced and the Russian military command too, is to occupy all of the Donetsk Oblast, so all of this area with the main agglomeration of the settlements of the cities Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkivka, Konstantinovka. And I just want to show you the satellite image of the place, so basically it looks like the major defense line of Ukraine. One settlement goes to another with almost no interruptions, just some of the villages on the way. So for Russia it will be very hard to get those under control, plus there are some of the water obstacles, so for sure to occupy this one, Russia would need to lose more than in Bakhmut and more than in Avdiivka. For now, the Russian losses is around 500,000 soldiers. We're speaking about KA and also wounded army personnel. Some of the Z patriots may say that this number is fiction, but give me your statistics please, because Russia doesn't show it, as well as Ukraine by the way, and I think it's normal for each side to hide their losses. But the international experts and also military intelligence, for example from UK, confirms that number. So if there is no any change in the Russian military tactics, if they continue to waste their soldiers on the front lines, For them to get Donetsk Oblast under control, they would need to lose at least 1 million soldiers just for the Donetsk Oblast, and with the current pace, they will do it in around 3 up to 4 years. We may easily calculate it by their advancement rate. By the way, here also some of the mistakes were done from Ukrainian side. Remember how the brigades were changed out there at the very important moment that was not appropriate to do so. So Ukrainian army is not ideal either. No army in the world is ideal, but the Russian army is really incompetent, especially the Russian military command. The solution they choose in this war is to use midwaves. It's the old Soviet tactics, but Russian population is not that big as in the Soviet Union. Before the war, Russia had around 40 million working men, those who are still able to fight. Many left the country and many lost their lives or health in Ukraine. So now this number is obviously much lower. While Russia actually tries to add some forces, they understand that at some moment they would have to announce a new massive mobilization in the Russian army. Now they pay a lot for the expats or mercenaries from Nepal or African countries to fight for Russia. They usually live not for a long time. And if the new Russian mobilization is announced, many Russian men would again leave Russia. Russians has already started to understand that from this war there's no return. And yes, Ukraine has much less resources. It's not even the population of Ukraine right now. I think we have around 25 million totally in Ukraine, from which I think 5 million are the men in the working age. But Ukraine is in defense, so it loses much less forces compared to the Russian army. And Ukraine tries to avoid heavy losses. Just yesterday I told you about one of the Ukrainian commanders, main commanders, who was even dismissed. I hope his actions will be investigated. At least our volunteers and military community, especially Marines, are calling for persecution. So Ukraine overall fights with higher efficiency compared to the Russian army. Also, the weaponry and artillery systems Ukraine has are much complicated and sophisticated compared to the Russian army. The Ukrainian shells are more precise, communication, logistics, everything is better for Ukraine. For now, Russia is just able to take the ground because they have lots of the stuff compared to Ukraine. Yes, their BTRs are much worse compared to Bradleys, their tanks are much worse compared to Leopard 2 tanks, but they're using the Soviet mighty power, even T-62 tanks, converting them to the Hunger or BDSM tanks. At the same time, we see that the storages in Russia are getting emptier, almost empty, I would say. Russia even had to move their army vehicles from the border with Finland, with NATO, to fight in Ukraine. So after all, I think NATO is not the greatest enemy of Russia. So the Russian military command is very close to the point to giving just Kalashnikovs to the Russian Ivans and call them to fight in Ukraine, announcing a new mobilization in Russia. This process is just imminent, I'm sure about it, and it might happen this year. Well, actually I expected it to happen this spring, but because Ukraine hadn't had enough weaponry, Russia still had enough resources to gain some of the ground, as they try to do right now. And as for the Russian losses, it will be like a snowball for the Russian army men. Russia will just replace the lacking vehicles with their soldiers, that's it. Just remember how more than 1 year ago Prigozhin called Gerasimov, Shoigu, where is munition? So the munition crisis will be there in Russia. Even though North Korea supplied the shells for Russia, but at first those shells are not that effective compared to, for example, Russian-made, not even saying about 155mm German-made, for example, artillery shells, or American-made. There are tons of the complaints from the Russian side about the quality of the artillery shells they get from the North Korea. They simply do not reach their target, and also they worn down the barrels of artillery systems, limiting the resource of the Russian artillery, so North Korean shells are not always good. Because Russia is unable to reach control over the Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and they haven't even fully occupied Luhansk Oblast, they call for some sort of the peace agreements with the Ukraine, but actually it's fake. They want to get the ground just because they physically unable to do so. Today, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said that Russia will not continue fighting during the process of the peace talks. It means that they're not looking for peace. It seems like the Russian management is totally out of the reality. I think that Putin lives in a parallel world, then Russia is always winning. But if you take some sort of the village or the house, it doesn't mean that Russia is winning. No, Russia is losing. Lots of the soldiers, lots of the resources. And those are not infinite. And if you check out the combined GDP of all of the countries which support Ukraine, you'll see that it's 75% of all of the world GDP. So potentially Ukraine has enormous resources even fighting against Russia. The main thing is to support that resource to Ukraine. But sometimes we have troubles with that from some of the Western politicians. Some of them still wanted the things as they were before, but it's impossible. They have to deal with Russia, otherwise the new world war will come. Some of the Russian military bloggers say that it's just a matter of time that Russia occupies all of the eastern side of Ukraine, announcing a Novorossiya Republic. Well, I agree, it's just a matter of time, maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years, and it would cost millions of losses in Russia. Obviously, Russia will not do it because it will collapse before. With such a tremendous losses, obviously, Russian economy would shrink, bearing all of the internal problems in Russia. And we understand that there are lots of the internal problems because the Russian society is pretty much divided. It's very hard to keep them all together. Just 1 year ago, Russia was one step from the total collapse with Prigozhin attempted military coup. And now we see some of the clashes in Dagestan, so Russia looks very solid, but actually it's not. A tiny little spark sometimes is enough to light up a huge fire of revolution. Actually, every revolution in Russia wasn't expected before and happened very rapidly. But usually military conflicts expedite that process, as the First World War was one of the main causes for Red Revolution to start in Russian Empire, as well as the Afghan War was one of the crisis moments in the Soviet history, which also led the Soviet Union to collapse. And it looks like this war which Putin started against Ukraine will be one of the main levers for Russia to collapse. I think that the world will finally understand that democratic Russia is not possible. Everyone was happy after the Soviet Union collapsed, the attitude was pro-American within the Russian society, but the ex-KGB agents took the power in Russia and now they changed the mood of society, bringing the renaissance of the Soviet Union. A new bloody empire appeared on the map and now they're searching for their allies, like for example North Korea, Iran or China. Altogether they form the bloc of the anti-democratic countries, so the future war is between authoritarian regimes like in Russia or China and the Western free world, which is, I agree, experiencing some of the troubles at first with its prompt reaction against those authoritarian regimes. My friends, if you like the job that I do daily on YouTube, you may also consider supporting me on Patreon. My page is available in the video description just below. You may find the link for it. Thank you so much for your motivation and for your great support. Well guys, hopefully you like this first part of the video. Let's go to other news. This is the Russian ammunition depot in Belgrade Oblast. It was attacked by the HIMARS rocket artillery, so thank you for permission the United States for Ukraine to use HIMARS against the Russian bases. Without the shells, the Russian army is just unable to advance. This is why they are failing. Yeah, here we speak about their Kharkiv operation, which was advertised all around their propaganda media as something really big that will conquer Ukraine finally. But now we see that Russia has tremendous troubles out there. About the attacks in Sevastopol, well, Russian military command has confirmed that they've shot down ATACMS missile, which later on hit the water mostly. I published this video on my Telegram channel. Here I will not publish it, it's just the screenshot. So the most of the clusters went into the water, which saved lots of the lives of civilians who decided to take the sun buses near to one of the biggest Russian bases in Crimea. By the way, the occupied territory. I would never go into Crimea if I was Russian. By the way, after this case, there were numerous of the cancellations of the trips for the Russian tourists. They just cancel those trips themselves, but the Russian authorities are still calling their people to go for vacation in Crimea. which is absolute nonsense. And as I say to you, the air sirens were not announced before the strike. What I can probably show you here are those splashes. So for sure, those are the clusters which went into the water. I mean, 99% of those, based on the video, landed out there, which is good for civilians. Alright, Russia continued to lose their air defense. In Belgrade Oblast, Russia lost Panzer I-S air defense system. They already lost many of those units. It means that Ukraine is preparing to use aviation more widely. Without aviation, Russia would absolutely stag on the front lines. That's the main advantage they have, and also they use lots of the gliding bombs, so hopefully F-16s might help with that threat. But probably it will not happen very soon, because Ukraine obtains just few of the airplanes this year, so the main delivery will be in next 2 years. So potentially Russia still has time and resources for their small advancements during the next year, but finally they will be stopped. By the way, Russia announced for the summer a huge offensive operation against Ukraine, and so far we don't see it. Why? Because they don't have resources. And this is how the Russian air defense system is looking right now. It's significantly damaged, not yet destroyed, but maybe the equipment is beyond repair. Because the turret, yes, for sure, it's absolutely no-go, and the equipment compartment is also damaged, and this is the place for the crew. So probably the crew survived, but not the vehicle. Absolutely great news, there was the exchange of the prisoners of war, 90 by 90. So 90 Russian prisoners were released, and 90 Ukrainian soldiers which were captured before were also released by the Russian side. So finally we have some of the movement in exchanges. Soon there's going to be one more exchange. There is the information that Mark Rutte will be nominated for the position of the General Secretary of NATO tomorrow. Well, maybe those are the good news. Mark Rutte supported Ukraine a lot, and Netherlands in general supported Ukrainian army with the military and even with military jets. I'm speaking about the F-16 program. Shoigu, Gerasimov, now you have the warrant from the International Court. Yes, the International Court in Hague accused those two individuals because, according to their orders, Russia targeted lots of the civilian infrastructure and energy infrastructure in Ukraine. Well, maybe there is a day to see all of those bastards in court, as it happened, for example, with Yugoslavian dictator. There were some of the news that Ukraine and Moldova are now on the final stage to join the European Union negotiation process, but it might continue for years and years. For example, Turkey is in this process for 18 years, and there is no perspective for them to join EU with the current management. Well, usually this process takes around 6 years, as it happened, for example, for Poland. So right now for Ukraine, I don't see the close perspective of joining the European Union. Plus, because of the war, Ukraine introduced the laws which are not okay according to the European constitution, let's say. And also there is a corruption problem as usual. The Indian Prime Minister to visit Moscow in July. India is one of the main customers for the Russian oil. However, there is the issue with payments. They do not pay Russia in dollars, euro, or any other currencies rather than rupees. And for Russia, it's very hard to convert those rupees. So as the solution that was proposed by the Indian side, they just called Russia to invest into Indian economy with those rupees to obtain dividends in several years. So mainly the oil which Russia sells right now to India is not very profitable for them. India also didn't sign the communique of the peace summit on Ukraine, which was held in Switzerland recently, but finally India was presented out there, and it's good. Plus, we see some of the fresh pictures of the Indian-made 155mm artillery shells, which probably were bought by allies according to the Czech initiative to supply shells to Ukraine. And you know, I don't see India supplying artillery shells to the Russian side, and it's a good sign. A very interesting video was published by the Deep State military map source. They uploaded the drone video showing the Ukrainian tank operation against the Russian infantry. The tank was really successful out there, even though Russians tried to hit the tank many times, but it successfully performed its mission, burning down the Russian positions near the village of Hliboke. Russia again tried to advance to the Chasiv Yar, but their convoy was totally demolished. Yeah, sorry I had to blur this image, but it is available on my Telegram, as usual. Remember how a few months ago Ukraine shot down the Russian Ilyushin-76? Well, Russia constructed the airplane from the debris they were able to find, and definitely there is a shrapnel telling that there was definitely air defense used. Russia claims that there were Ukrainian prisoners of war who were flying for exchange, but yet they didn't present any evidence of that. As one of the variants, indeed there were some of the Ukrainian prisoners of war on board. Russia delivered those on this airplane from Siberia, but the airplane was hit on the way back. Russians were able to construct the airplane from the very small debris, but they didn't present any sort of the bodies for DNA tests or something like that. Then Iran shut down Ukrainian International Airlines airplane, yes, the airline I was working for. All of the bodies of the passengers and crew were identified. The DNA samples were taken by Iranian side, and also relatives did it to know who is who, and here was done nothing. And according to the Micro-73 analytics, Ukraine was capable to take some of the ground in Donetsk Oblast. Well, not a lot, but still it is good. Spain sends Patriot missiles and Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Well, I guess Leopard 2 tanks, because Spain is the only country which promised those tanks to Ukraine this year. Ukraine obtained some of the Leopard 1 tanks from the other countries like Germany, but Leopard 2 were mostly supplied the last year. But Spain decided to give more, so awesome news. Reuters reports, citing their sources in Trump's circle, saying that Trump's peace plan is now valid and approved by the presidential candidate from Republican Party. Not yet officially, but we understand that Trump will go for the run from the red side. So the plan is very simple. Kyiv will be deprived of military assistance from Washington if it doesn't begin peace negotiations with Moscow. At the same time, the United States will warn Russia that its refusal to negotiate will lead to increase in American support for Ukraine. But what if the both sides refuse to negotiate, as it is happening right now? Because basically there are no common points for the future negotiations. Russia wants to take Ukrainian land, more of it, and Ukraine will never agree on that. So in that case, what should the United States do? Deprive Ukraine from the military support? Well, that's what we probably might see if Donald Trump will take power. And Russia is eagerly waiting for it. It's basically their dream for Donald Trump to win and seize the support of Ukraine. But even in that case, Ukraine will be not defeated by Russia, because there are many other allies and Trump is not forever in the White House, plus he doesn't have the infinite power. And here let's watch how Russians celebrated the Trump's victory back in 2016.
Well, these Russian Trump supporters have spent the night in this Moscow bar.
They told that Trump is our guy, Le Pen is our lady, and Putin is our leader. How funny is that? By the way, Marie Le Pen was standing applauding to Zelensky during his last visit to France. So in this case, is she still good for the Russian Z-Patriots? Back in 2016, one of the main Russian propagandists, Margarita Simonyan, said that she will put the American flag and drive with it across Moscow if she finds that flag. Come on, join me, Americans deserve that. But somehow later on there was a huge disappointment in Donald Trump among the Russian elite. But somehow they still think that Trump might give them Ukraine. Well, everything might happen, and maybe Trump wants to do it to finish the war, as he says. But after all, Donald Trump is not a god. It's up to Ukrainians to have a final decision. And if Donald Trump decides to block the military support for Ukraine, this initiative from his side will be also blocked by many of the American politicians. Well, anyways, we'll see how it goes. Trump is not the American president at this stage, and the election's outcome result is very hard to predict. And now, my friends, please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so, you help me a lot. I wish you all, as usual, a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.